Hey everyone, this is Mikko, and for this painting I had two kind of cornerstone requirements that I wanted this painting to achieve. I want it to be part of my Art is My Real Home challenge. Link is in the description if you want to join. You can use this hashtag on Instagram and I will find your painting that way. But I wanted this to be not only a house, but I wanted most of the colors to be pink. Those are the two kind of main requirements that I have for this painting. And I didn't have any more specifics for that. The whole idea basically came from seeing these trees outside my building. They're really beautiful, these pink flowers blossoming at this time of the year, and it's only for a very limited amount of time. So I'm lucky that I had my camera so that I could take some footage to show you guys. They look really awesome, and that just got me inspired to do just something pink basically. When I don't have a more specific idea, I try to take what I can from the idea to gather more elements so that I can get further inspired by the colors, and maybe it's just something that will spark my imagination. So the palette that you see me using in the beginning of this video, that is not actually useful for creation of this painting. That is just a tool that I made for myself to play around with this palette of different colors and then mixing them together. Pretty much for every video somebody's always asking me what brushes I use. I always want to point out that that's the wrong question to ask, because almost always I'm using one brush, and the same thing is true for this video as well. I'm using only one brush that I made myself, and that brush is also used for the clouds that I am going to be doing for the sky at the end of this video. I'm pretty happy with this brush so far because it can do these both things, create these very hard edges and the softness of the clouds. So I think it's almost done. One thing that I am not still happy with is the shape of the brush, so I'm probably going to edit that before I put my own brush set for sale on Gumroad, but that's going to happen at some point. I just want the tools to be ones that I'm actually happy using myself, and this is the brush set that I have been working on for years basically now, so it will be done when it's done, but it's only a few tweaks away from now at this point. So thank you for your patience, and at the same time I wanted to remind everybody that you don't need my brushes. The brushes already in Procreate are super good and they're free. There's also this other video that I created about my favorite Procreate brushes. All of the brushes mentioned in that video are free and already in your copy of Procreate. So remember that you don't need my brushes, especially you don't need them in plural, because I definitely recommend sticking with only one or two brushes that you feel comfortable with, and then just focus on the brush strokes, because with brush strokes you can create so much more than these brushes that are just stamps that copy the same stamp all over the painting. The reason why I'm mentioning this is that I've seen a lot of brushes online, for example for foliage, where the brush shape itself is the shape of a single leaf, and then people use those brushes to create foliage for trees in a picture. While that might look like an easy way to add a ton of detail in your painting, you don't really want to have detail in your painting that is not purposeful and directing the eye towards your main visual impact in that piece. So when you use these sort of stamped brushes, for example some people use a single blade of grass and then use that as a stamp to create millions of blades of grass in their painting, when you could just be doing few brush strokes for the grass area and then have the eye move through the grass area to the actual points of interest in your piece. Of course, doing everything by hand like this takes a lot of time. I'm not trying to say that doing this painting took me days and days of work, but I do think that when you make stuff by hand, the end result is kind of more thought out, because you go through this thought process every time you start to paint one area, that do I need to have this detail here? Is it actually helping, or is it distracting from my main focal point? Because even though this painting might have less detail than something that would be done with stamp type of brushes, I think the detail I put in is stuff that I actually want to be there. So I think the detail that I put in is actually stuff that I have thought about and want to be there. Now, this might vary depending on how you like to paint. This is just me explaining what my process for painting is and the thought process of why I make these decisions for the tools that I use and the tools that I don't use. Recently, I had the unfortunate experience of telling few of my students in the concept art class that do not use the smudge brush in Photoshop for 5 years, because it's distracting you from learning how to use brushstrokes in a painting. And I know that every time you as a teacher tell somebody not to use something, of course they are going to want to use the exact thing that was forbidden for them. So this is probably not my smartest choice of words that I did in that feedback session, but hopefully they will understand that my duty as a teacher is to try to help them. That's the only reason why I said that, not just to make painting less fun and to be restrictive, but setting up your work process in a way that helps you learn much faster. I think that's one of the most beneficial things you can do, especially if you're new to painting and have started painting recently. Bringing in pretty much all of the possible tools that are available to you, no matter what application you are using. That is a sure way to kind of clog up the learning process, because you have so many different elements, all of which might be helpful for creation of different images or illustrations or paintings. But in the beginning, you don't know what your goals for creating a good image are yet. So limiting the tools definitely is always a more effective way to learn. For the lines of this piece, I am using the template that I made for Art is My Real Home challenge. You can see these templates in the video. They are free to use even if you're not doing this challenge. That's just there to help you, especially during this time when I think creativity can sometimes be difficult. And I created these templates also for myself, so I would have a lower barrier of entry to start a painting when I'm feeling not as inspired. So for this piece, I'm using the facade of the building that doesn't really have any perspective in the lines of this template. So I'm breaking apart the entire facade and piecing it together in a new way. That way I can use the aspect ratio of the windows and keep the door sizes the same in comparison. But it's quite fun how easy it is to use these assets to create a building that looks completely different, and yet it gets rid of all of that boring stuff, which is creating these windows and making sure that the panels are the exact same size and so on. And then adding this perspective to the building, I did that just by going to the perspective guide and adding one vanishing point. I'm only using one vanishing point to create the thickness of this building. It's not that important to the visual impact of this piece. I only use the thickness to carve out this additional balcony in the building, and that is just created to add more visual appeal to how the sunlight is playing with the structure of this building. That's the whole idea why this three-dimensionality even exists. I don't see the need of me needing to prove that I can do a three-dimensional building. I think those sort of ideas don't really interest me. But if it drives the story forward and if it adds to the sense of mood in the piece, then I think these sort of elements are worth the trouble. I'm really not interested in impressing anyone. I think this has been a huge change in my life, and especially in my artistic career. When I was working on a lot of commercial projects, and especially when the producers were not even living in Finland, when it's some guy in a London office just sometimes looking through my paintings and giving their feedback to them. It's basically you're just trying to get the project moving forward and to get the funding for whatever you are making. You have to kind of put the project and the funding of the project to the foreground in all those situations, so you don't get that much creative freedom at the end. And when working that way, you kind of eventually start having this mentality bleed into your own work and your own sense of aesthetics. And to me, that was not good at all, because a lot of the things that I was working on, they were like these like dark and violent projects that had very dark, desaturated colors, and I love painting colors, so there was this whole other aspect of me missing, and I put so much of my time and effort into my work that I didn't really have creative energy on my free time to dedicate to my own paintings, and I forgot how important that is to me and basically my whole happiness. If I would advise one thing to the new concept artists, it's just always have something of your own, always keep painting for yourself, and always have online presence outside of the company that you are working for, and make sure whenever you are signing any contracts that it allows for you to own your own work that you make on your free time, and to sell your own work that you make on your free time, and to keep the rights to the projects that you make by yourself. That sounds like that should be a given, but you would be surprised how strict some of these contracts can be when big companies, they want to own everything you do, not just during work, but even on your free time. So there's something that you definitely should be mindful of. The hardest thing for me in this video to talk about, and I have tried to make this voiceover for 5 times now and I always fail, but it's because it's really hard to talk about the way that doing these dark and violent projects affected me in many ways. I would have, for example, reference material of car accidents that are terribly horrific looking, and I would have them on my second screen and I would use them as a reference, for example, when working on zombie games and stuff. But also the whole work environment and culture was kind of directed towards certain type of aesthetic. And I remember when I was younger, there was this CG society that I think still exists. And when you went to the main page, you would see this kind of like overview of what the whole entertainment industry of concept art is and what is the look that you should be aiming for. And they all do this kind of similar style. I mean, of course there are great and amazing artists working in all industries. I'm just talking about if we lump them all together and have them as tiny thumbnails filling the entire screen, and then you zoom out, then I could kind of see that like there is a look here that I'm expected to hit, and I realized very slowly that my look is not that look. And this is also the reason why I don't have an ArtStation account even so far. I might have someday, but as of today I still don't have one, because if I open ArtStation and I look at the main page, I think that is the same look that used to be in CG Society and conceptart.org previously, and I think it's presenting this look that this is what good concept art looks like, and this is the aesthetic, and this is what those kind of characters, and this is how you paint environments. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with those paintings, but I refuse to visit a page that tells me that this look is the right way to do things every time, because I know that subconsciously over time it would affect me and it would make me compare my own work to that stuff, and I don't think I'm part of that crowd. And I'm not saying this as something that I'm annoyed by. I think it's completely fine that art is serving the public that is made for. That's great. That there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, I have noticed that I don't want to be doing that look anymore. I'm done. I have done my dark games, and now it's time for colorful stuff. I can't imagine any game where some producer would have called me and said that, can you please make a pink wooden building, and then the sky is just exploding with pink with cherry blossom trees surrounding it. Like, this would have been like winning the lottery for me 8 years ago, but just as unlikely. It's just not what those projects were. Unfortunately. Or fortunately, I don't really regret having the experience of like doing different styles, because I think it's that experience that has taught me to be flexible with my style and to learn new styles, just like trying on a pair of new jeans, that you don't have to take it seriously. And even if you change your style as an artist, you can still do different things, and you can have many styles and still be completely comfortable in all of them. You don't need to work on one style your entire life to be good at it. You have time to be comfortable doing many styles. And I'm not the only artist who does this, by the way. There are many artists who want to change the way that they do paintings, and that's completely fine. And sometimes changing things, it's just more enjoyable for me, honestly. When doing a painting like this, to me personally, what is the most challenging is getting the sharp lines in the right places. And having that template definitely helps here, but I also want to make sure that I'm not over relying on the template itself, because it's a very generic template and it's meant to give freedom by not giving away too much detail. So I'm having the template on a separate multiply layer, and it is set at very, very low opacity, because the opacity of the line art layer is so low, it forces me to paint the necessary detail in a very sharp way, where the viewer needs that extra clarity to know where the lines are happening. And that is the most challenging aspect of this, because it's a very time-consuming process. But I believe that when I'm doing it by hand like this, and when I'm doing it with color and not just with lines, that helps those elements that are repeating or just straight up copied in the house look vivid and interesting throughout the building, because the windows, they are all the same window. They are the exact same copy, just in different places, but I am using different variations of that blue hue, and the light is hitting the windows differently. So that's the only thing that is creating this movement for the eye to travel through the building and see the visual interest and visual appeal there. At this stage, I'm also noticing that my initial thought for what these trees on the left should be, I have modified that quite a lot, because I have noticed that the house needs quite a lot of detail to hold up the entire piece, because it's right in the center of it. So that's why I am choosing not to add too much detail to these trees and this foliage, because they are right at the corner of the image, and I never want to have my sharpest details aligning with the corner of the painting, because somehow I'm always trying to say to the viewer that the painting is over here. You need to go back to the center to see where the actual action is happening. When it comes to painting this kind of more loose and free style, I always think that my biggest turning point was doing this painting that is called Ever Since That Day The Horses Have Been Happier, and I think that was at the lowest point when I was just feeling completely miserable, and I thought that even when I was doing like technically impressive pieces that were epic enough to impress the producers, I just felt like I'm not happy. I don't like painting anymore. And then I did this painting, and it is so crazy. I mean, one of those horses has free Wi-Fi, if you don't notice. And I just felt so excited that I created this piece, because it's so free and I had so much fun doing it. And it's through that painting that I kind of found the joy back into painting, and I understood that it's more important to make myself happier before trying to impress other people, because I was trying to kind of look for approval from other people to be an artist and have the permission to paint and so on. on, and I really needed my own permission, and I didn't know the things that make me happy, and I didn't know what it is about painting that I enjoy. And creativity was taking a back seat because honestly, I was not allowing it for it to be in. It's really important to give space for your creativity in the process, otherwise it will just not enter the scene at all. For this painting, my main criteria that I wanted to achieve was I want to have pink colors, and I want to have these trees, and there has to be a house. That's it. That's not too strict. And the reason why I'm leaving so much free space here, because I know that I need to have these two things, but for creativity to work with me, I need to have something to give to my creativity to kind of lure it into the picture. And I'm giving my creativity all this freedom to come up with different ideas of how to do the painting, and that way I can kind of like trap it inside this process and kind of play with me. But if I try to tell my creativity every single detail how it needs to be in the piece, like I'm sure it's not stupid, it knows that if I don't let it work, it won't, because I need it, and I need to kind of show that in the process that I need my creativity, and I'm actively making room for it and space for it to be creative, and I let it have a say in this process, because it's not just my painting, it's both of our paintings. I am kind of just slapping on the paint here, but my creativity is the one that is coming up with all the cool ideas, and I try not to get in the way with the best of my ability. By the way, you probably noticed that I haven't painted the sky before this point at all, and the reason for this is because I'm quite confident when it comes to painting skies. I love painting clouds, and I don't have anxiety about the fact that I wouldn't know what to do with the sky. I know this might sound cocky, but it's because I enjoy painting clouds so much. I'm just like super excited to paint them. So having this house with all the sharp edges, that is the hard to work on part for me in this painting. So I wanted to leave all of the sky as the last thing in this painting, because I want to have something super fun to look forward to. And I always knew that I am going to make the sky absolutely explode with this bright pink and salmon colors, and that's why the lower half of the entire building, even though it's taking up a lot of room in the piece, there's not that much high contrast detail there, because I want to leave room for this sky, and the sky is the thing that is going to kind of bring all these elements together, and it's going to make the cold pinks in the lower half of the painting be balanced with these warmer pinks, because that's where the light is hitting it, and I'm going to be doing so many different color adjustments to get this balance right. But no matter how tedious that is the most fun part of this entire piece. I just like cannot get enough of this whole process. This sort of glowing parts that you see me flashing on the painting, it's an additive layer that has few pink brush strokes that are processed with a very strong Gaussian blur, and that creates this sort of like gradient glow effect. But the only way, and I want to be very clear here how this works, the only way I can make this work is by painting in a limited saturation level when it comes to all of the previous painting that you have seen thus far in this painting. I'm very careful of not going overboard with the saturation, because when I use these glows at the end, and I always knew that I am going to use them at this phase, if the saturation is too high and I add these glows on top, that will blow out those areas that are too saturated into these lumps of like highly saturated color that just looks terrible. So I need to be conscious of leaving enough editing room so there can be a soft gradient where the saturation moves from zero saturation to like full on like blast of color. That will brighten up these areas that are kind of dull looking so far. Even these glows in the windows, they are kind of low saturation because I am adding these additive layers on top of them to add more of these light effects, and then I'm adjusting them constantly with hue and saturation multiple times to make sure that the saturation doesn't go overboard and that all the hues are building up to this visual impact of different light hitting different parts of the image all the time. The additive layer that I sometimes sometimes flash on, that is not a well thought out element that is going to be in the final piece, and because of the resolution of this piece, sometimes I even have to delete that layer completely, and then I move on to a duplication of the file and work with the more important layers. That is just a stand-in additive layer that I am using to check the colors if they are going too saturated, and that my idea for the painting, which is these glows blasting through these like finer structural details of the building, are gonna show the right way. But I'm not leaving that as just a guess. I need to test that in action a few times, so that's why I have this test layer that I sometimes press on and see how it's going to look. But if it's getting in the way of me painting and I need that extra layer for constructing the more essential parts of the image, then I delete it, because it's one of those final touches that I can add very easily. It's not a time-consuming process to add the glow. Part of the reason why this part of the painting feels so exciting to me is because the sky is not a minor player in this image. It's kind of a big part of the whole emotion that is building up in this piece, and seeing it at the end is a complete surprise to me. I didn't know that this would happen, and I'm super glad that it's coming along so nicely. I mean, sure, I said earlier that I'm quite confident in painting clouds, yeah, but still, I'm just like super excited about the way that this looks. By the way, if somebody out there thinks that I should like maybe love my paintings less, then I would say that maybe you should love your paintings more. If anybody thinks that like it's somehow required to have this sort of like self-loathing phase in your artistic career where you hate everything you make because you need to do better all the time, and that self-loathing is kind of forcing you to become a better artist, I have to say that I'm here from the future to tell that I went through the whole self-hatred phase, and it didn't help me at all to be a better painter. And you could just like skip all of that suffering and get to the fun part and enjoy the cool stuff that you are making. It's fine, and I promise you that this will make the process of painting thousands of paintings and getting better that way so much more enjoyable. And honestly, nobody's gonna come to your house and give you a permission to enjoy painting and like your own paintings, so you might as well do that for yourself. Or if you need someone else's permission, you have my permission to do it. Like your pieces, it's fine. That won't like curb your progress. You will still want to get better. That's just the nature of being an artist, that you always want to explore new ways of making things, and you can't help it but learn better ways to do the same things. You will learn faster ways to paint, and you will find more efficient ways to communicate visual impact in your pieces. I have full faith in this. And then in the last phase, by the way, I'm adding this railing that I completely forgot that exists. If somebody asks me what that horizontal beam is at the balcony, I have no idea. Maybe there's some like water or electricity running through that, but there's a line. I have no idea. I tweaked pretty much every single layer of these clouds multiple times, and I mean like dozens of times, just to make sure that I am absolutely milking every possibility for visual appeal in the sky. And it's just one of those moments where if you were walking by this house, you would, I hope, would look up and say like, wow, look at the clouds, the sky is looking great today. Because I noticed that when I'm walking around with my friends, sometimes they don't notice the sky, and it feels like I'm always the one that is always looking at what is happening at the sky. There's like cool stuff happening there, and if you just pay attention to it when you're painting, you can kind of like recall those things from your visual library and kind of relive the awesome moments when you have a nice weather, especially when it's like dark and raining outside. Then you can always paint, so that makes life more enjoyable, right? I'm adding like one more layer of glows to these clouds by adding this sort of like warmer tone, and that is reserved at the top of the painting area, because I want it to look like the light is being funneled through these like massive clouds and it's not hitting every area evenly. And now when I have enough information, I can add that glow to the horizon. I'm erasing most of it away just to give more volume to this building and more mass to these trees. And the hue and saturation of this additive layer, it's very dark because only the lightest areas are gonna show. So if I adjust it to almost black, it's only going to affect the darkest areas. And as always, there is no black in my painting, that is just dark colors of purple here, because I don't think adding black works in paintings like this. That often it seems to kind of kill the vibrancy, so I just try to avoid it, it's easier. In the end, I'm adding this one more color adjustment to the entire painting by using the curves, and I'm doing this on a duplicated layer, and after adjusting the hues this way, I'm setting that layer to only hue, because I don't want it affecting the luminosity and the values of the painting, because I have worked so hard on those. It's just a layer that is going to tweak the hues in the painting slightly to kind of unify everything together. And that's the pink painting. Thanks for watching this video. I'm Mikko and I hope you go and paint with whatever colors you feel like using today. And I will see you in the next video. Bye!